We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you joining us here on the Agri-Pulse Facebook page. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher. A pair of special guests with us here today as we try and dissect what we know and what we don't know and what it all means in terms of the 2020 election and the results that we have and the results that are yet to come. Appreciate Randy and Rob joining us. Randy, of course, is Randy Russell of the Russell Group. Runs that firm out of his Crystal City, Virginia office. Was after some previous stints at the Department of Agriculture, Pillsbury Group, NCFC, among others. Also appreciate Rob Larew, the president of the National Farmers Union, joining us. Rob is, of course, NFU's president and assumed that position earlier this year after joining NFU a few years ago and a 22-year stint prior to that, split between Congress and the Department of Agriculture. So appreciate the two of you joining us and appreciate in advance the perspectives that you'll both provide here on these races. And before we kind of dive into things, I want to just kind of offer up a lay of the land, so to speak, in terms of what we know and what we don't know and what's yet to be determined. So I've got my handy little notepad here that we'll go with. And starting off, we do know that overnight the race for the White House did lean a little bit in the direction of former Vice President Joe Biden. Right now, he is up in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, awaiting to learn more about the margins, should he be able to maintain those and what they ultimately will be. President Trump currently up in Georgia and North Carolina, again, waiting the final margins on those races. Should Biden maintain the leads that he has in all of those states, he will be the 45th president of the United States. But of course, vote counting needs to occur. In the Senate, a very good night for the GOP as they were able to hold on to a number of seats, particularly in some rural states, places like Kansas, where Roger Marshall won the seat of the retiring committee chairman Pat Roberts. In Iowa, Joni Ernst able to hold on to her seat. In Montana, Steve Daines able to hold on to his. And in the state of Georgia, still awaiting the final numbers on the race for David Perdue to hold his seat, but it does look like Senate Ag Committee member Kelly Loeffler is headed towards a runoff, which will be decided in January. But at this point, as we said, Senator Perdue is still waiting for some final results, but also Senator Tom Tillis waiting for final results out of North Carolina on that race. As we sit here right now, the GOP in good position to maintain its control of the United States Senate. And we scroll down further down the ballot to the House of Representatives, where Democrats, to put it frankly, had a bit of a rough night. And least of all, and probably arguably probably the most important race, not named the presidency, was the Minnesota 7th District race, and where House Ag Committee Chair Colin Peterson, running for re-election, ultimately lost that re-election bid and lost it to the tune of about 14 points to Republican challenger Michelle Fishback. Also, a couple of other rural races that we were watching, places like Abby Finkenauer in Iowa's 1st District, lost that district in the northeast part of the state of Iowa. House Ag Committee member and Democrat freshman Jotiel Torres Small lost her re-election efforts in New Mexico. Still waiting on some results on a couple of other House Ag Democrats. Let's see, Abigail Spanberger and Sherry Bustos awaiting the final votes total on those races. Very tight at this point. A number of other places that still waiting on those final measures, but at this point, what we do know is that it was a bit of a rough night for Democrats, especially in rural areas. And so, Rob, with all of that in mind, I want to start with you here as we look at, I mentioned your career in Congress, a lot of that spent working for Colin Peterson. And so with all of that in mind, as we sit here right now, where do Democrats go from here in the context of leadership of the House Ag Committee? Who's going to do it? What the priorities will be? What do you think we should be watching for out of that side of the committee dais?
Yeah, I think that given the loss in the Minnesota 7th and Chairman Colin Peterson's situation, there will be obviously a change in the leadership. They will figure that out on their own at the leadership level. Certainly, we know who the top kind of folks are there at the committee. You have David Scott in Georgia, who's one of the senior folks. You have Jim Costa from California. You also have Representative Marcia Fudge from Ohio, all of whom have a lot of seniority there. But I think really, beyond, I would argue, and I think a lot of folks in agriculture, the loss of Colin Peterson when we start the new Congress next year is going to be felt in many different ways. But I think also much of the work that he has done to build in not only support from his members down the dais, if you will, making sure that all the members of the Ag Committee are up to speed on the issues at times, whether they want to or not. That education and that kind of method of leadership where you are involving even your junior members is going to serve the committee and I think ultimately agriculture for a long time here.
So looking then at the broader impact of the Ag Committee, as you mentioned there, and in farm policy more broadly, really, Randy, we saw, Colin Peterson was sort of viewed as the last of a dying breed in these rural Democrats that could speak with some fluency on some farm policy issues, and was not only able to speak with that fluency, was very passionate about those issues. So looking, kind of zooming out from just the Ag Committee jurisdiction and looking broadly at the farm policy impact, as we keep in mind that we're, it's not out of the question that we're going to see some farm bill preparation in this next congressional cycle with the current legislation set to expire in 2023. Can you help us contextualize what the broader farm policy impact is of losing a member like Colin Peterson?
Well, Spencer, I think Rob hit the nail on the head. If you look at Colin Peterson, he has been in Congress for 30 years and as two-time chairman of the House Ag Committee. Pat Roberts, who is retiring, has been in Congress, either the House or Senate, for 40 years and been chair of both committees. Mike Conaway, retiring, has been in Congress 15 years. If you take those three members, that's 85 years worth of experience, wisdom, knowledge, leadership that is no longer there. Now, obviously, others will step up and I'm sure do a very good job, but it's hard to fill those shoes, that void of three people that have been such strong advocates for production agriculture and the food industry. So I think it's going to be a bit of an adjustment. As Rob talked about, there's going to be new staff involved, and there's going to be a lot of new members on the committee. So big shoes to fill from those that are coming in. I also think with Debbie Stabenow there, who's been in Congress for 20 years, been chair for 4 years and key member for 6, I think she'll play a very, very significant role, as she always does, but maybe even an enhanced role going forward because of her background and experience.
As Spencer said, described, we don't know the outcome of the presidential race yet. Certainly, the trends seem to be in Joe Biden's direction. However, one thing we do know for sure is that there was not a blue wave that a lot of people thought might develop. One of the big reasons for that, obviously, is what happened in rural counties. President Trump clearly maintained, in some cases even increased his margins, got more votes out of rural counties and some rural blue collar areas, and including some many counties that Barack Obama had carried as recently as 2012. Rob, Democrats really made a concerted effort this time, led by former Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack and others, to cut into GOP margins in rural areas, try to get back some of that support that Hillary Clinton had lost. What went wrong?
Well, there'll be plenty of ground, but I think, without looking at what went wrong, I think one of the things that's probably worth highlighting here is the fact that one of the things that changed was the fact that there was a concerted effort by the Biden campaign there. There was a ton of work in rural areas. And while the votes may not be there, I think what it does reflect is if Biden should get over the top and be deemed president, then I think what this does is also put him in the position which he was in while campaigning, recognizing neither president, we're seeing this play out, are going to receive a mandate, right? This isn't going to be a wave by any stretch. And so that next administration, whoever it is, quite frankly, should be one about finding ways to pull us together. I think Biden ran his campaign based upon that as part of what was tying his rural messaging out there. And I think that will play well into any sort of transition here, working with Congress, working on some of these sticky issues which are going to be around and that they're going to be facing.
Randy, what lessons should Republicans draw from this? How much of this is President Trump, his personality? How much of it is his issues? I mean, there are some counties there looking in that region, Northeast Iowa and bordering regions, where again, Barack Obama did very well in 2012, 2008, and big margins for Republicans this time. What do Republicans have to do to maintain that, and how much of it is Donald Trump?
Well, Phil, I would start off by saying the big loser last night were the pundits and the pollsters. The fact is that, again, for the second presidential election cycle in a row, they've been wildly off, this time much greater than even last time. Last time it was on some of the state polls. This time it was on state polls and the national poll. The national, if Joe Biden ends up winning, it'll be by probably less than 2% of the popular vote. Real Clear Politics had this the day before the election as +10 for Biden. So, I mean, wildly off. You look at some of these Senate races, North Carolina with Tillis, most of them had Tillis losing. Up until the Des Moines Register with Joni Ernst in Iowa, they had her behind. They had Lindsey Graham running either neck and neck or at least somewhat of a toss-up. You had even the race with Roger Marshall in Kansas that he ended up winning by 11 as being very close. So a lot of these races, they were wildly off. I think that if you look at where the Democrats are losing, it is in rural areas. And you're absolutely right. President Trump actually increased his margin, it appears, in rural areas. You look in Colin Peterson's district, I believe Rob would know better than I, but last time around, I think that President Trump got in 2016 about 61% of the vote in that district. This time he got 66% of the vote. And that's hard to overcome ticket splitting wise if you're Colin Peterson. So I think in a lot of these rural counties, you look at Brindisi lost from the Ag Committee. You mentioned Torres Small lost from the Ag Committee. Abby Finkenauer is not on the Ag Committee, but obviously a rural district, and she got beat. You have TJ Cox running behind in California, another member of the Ag Committee, the former member David Valadao. And you have Abigail Spanberger, who is it's a tight race in Virginia, kind of very unexpectedly. So a lot of these members that are losing on the Democratic side, I mean, no one would have thought, pundit-wise, that Republicans were going to pick up seats on the House side, and it looks like they are going to pick up seats. I don't know one pundit that was predicting Republicans would pick up House seats this time around, and virtually every pundit predicted that the Senate was going to flip, and that appears not to be the case either.
So we've talked a lot about some of the results that we've seen and what may have caused those. I'm sure we will all be poring over exit polling and future data sets to look over what happened and what it means. But want to look at now kind of where we go from here. Because keeping in mind, again, bearing in mind that we don't know officially the results of the presidential election yet, let's, if you'll both indulge us in a hypothetical here, let's say the current results hold and Biden is indeed elected. He will be doing that against the backdrop of a Republican Senate and a administration that is obviously a Democratic and a Democratic House. And so we keep that in mind, and it's going to be a very divided government, but one that a potentially a President Biden would need to move things like judicial nominees, cabinet nominees, legislative priorities. Randy, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think we should anticipate in terms of a working relationship and a level of functionality between the possibility of a President Biden and a GOP Senate with a Democratic House?
Well, Spencer, under that scenario, I think it puts a high value on bipartisanship. And I also think that it takes kind of the extremes of the parties and puts them over into the corner. I mean, Vice President Biden was in the Senate for a very long time, over 4 decades, has a very good working relationship with many of the members. Once you get past the campaign, assuming he is president, at some point he wants to get his legislative agenda across the finish line, and he's going to have to work with Republicans and Democrats in the Congress. And I think that's exactly what will happen. So I think you're going to see legislation move forward addressing things like infrastructure. We'll probably see a debate about climate, although it may be a different nature of the debate on climate. I think we will have a debate about that. I think we'll have a debate about many, many other issues, but it's going to put a high priority and a high essence on bipartisanship, because nothing can get done without Republicans and Democrats working together in that kind of an environment.
Well, and Rob, as we've discussed, it was pretty widely expected going into this race that we were going to potentially see a President Biden winning by a pretty substantial margin, potentially flipping the Senate's to Democrat control. What does the GOP potentially holding the Senate? Again, a number of races aren't final yet, but that's kind of the expected outcome at this point. What does a potential Democratic White House and the GOP Senate do in terms of things like legislative priorities and even going as far as potential cabinet nominees?
Yeah, well, I think much to Randy's points here, this is just teeing up bipartisanship. Certainly Biden's past and those relationships are going to be hugely important. And while I think there were a lot of folks looking at the possibility of Democrats taking not only the White House, but the Senate and keeping House, obviously. I don't think that that's what the campaign, it's certainly not what they were talking about. They were talking about ways to be bipartisan, talking about ways to work across, because, once again, even if the Senate had flipped, trying to govern at the federal level in an environment where the electorate is so divided and the margins are so narrow there, it takes a different tact. If you want to make sure you don't suffer huge losses in 2 years, say in the House, by the Democrats. So I think that you will see, particularly if the Senate doesn't flip, an effort at trying to find those issues that they can work together on. I think Randy's absolutely right that climate change will be one of those. I would argue that would have been, that's going to be one of those issues that's out there regardless of how the presidential race comes out. But we have to find those ways to work together. Absolutely.
Well, and on the subject of cabinet nominees, there were some talk leading up to this that this could potentially be one of the more progressive cabinets that we'd seen in quite some time, possibly ever in the United States. Does the potential for GOP Senate control hinder that possibility, do you think?
I think it tempers it. I don't know if it hinders it. Obviously, there's a lot of people that think that whoever wins the presidency, they have their right to pick their own cabinet. And that's kind of a time-honored tradition. Having said that, when you are this narrowly divided, and it could be a Senate that's +1 Republican, +2 Republican, +3 Republican, who knows? We'll have to see with the race in Michigan and a few of these others. But that is close enough that they're going to have to put up cabinet officials that can get bipartisan support. So it definitely has more of a Republican input on that process. But again, I think in most cases, cabinet officers will be chosen with an eye to getting them confirmed. And if they're highly controversial, they may not get confirmed.
I mean, if we just look back at the last time we were looking at cabinet officials and confirmations, I mean, you had those nominations that were the dream nominations, right? But that just didn't pass the, in some cases, qualifications test or certainly kind of, the ability to get it through, and I think that there's not going to be much difference in that, right? Any kind of extreme nominations, those ultimate wishes, if you will, I think there'll be, particularly since, again, this is somebody who's been through that process, former senator. I think that is going to have a bearing on how those nominations work their way through, how they're vetted, and ultimately, hopefully, get confirmed through that process. Because we also see in this last administration change, those big delays that you sometimes get with those problem nominations mean that key positions at USDA, if we're talking about that, EPA, linger out there, and we can't get the work done that we need to get done.
I think one other point, Spencer, is that it's going to greatly limit, if not eliminate, choosing sitting senators or sitting House members to serve in the cabinet just because of the narrow margins. In fact, there's been some talk out of the Biden campaign that they wouldn't pick anybody that is currently sitting in the Congress just because of the narrow margins. So it may have some impact in that regard as well.
I want to turn to trade for a minute. Maybe the biggest single issue for the farm economy now going forward. President Trump obviously promised to keep the tariffs on China. Joe Biden said he would remove them. Where do we go from here? Do you see in the next few months, next year or two, in terms of our relationship with China, Randy? And how do you think China is going to respond? What's this going to mean for ag?
Well, Phil, starting off, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, China is on a path, and the slope of that line isn't going to change regardless of who's president. And what do I mean by that? They, have been manipulating their currency. They've been stealing intellectual property. They've been restricting foreign investment from U.S. companies in China. They have taken over Hong Kong. They've been very aggressive in the South China Sea. They have their eyes set on Taiwan. They have human rights violations with the Uyghurs, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, how do I think it might be a variance between Joe Biden and Donald Trump? I think Joe Biden probably will try to get, assuming he's president, more allied support to put pressure on China. But the reality of it is the large trade deficit and all these other issues I pointed out aren't going to change because we have a change in presidency, assuming there is one. And I think that the trajectory of having to be pretty tough on China is going to remain. And despite some of the criticism of President Trump's trade policies towards China, it certainly didn't hurt him in the rural vote, as often has been talked about by many people that it would, and that did not pan out. And in fact, it looks like the numbers are showing, as we talked about earlier, that he did better in rural areas this time than he did in 2016.
Yeah, Robin. In fact, the exit poll I've seen suggests that the voters actually like President Trump's approach to China. A large number saying he's not tough enough, if anything. Where do you see Biden? Where do you see Democrats going on China?
Yeah, well, I think Randy hit it. Like, the being tough on China for all of the reasons laid out there. Those reasons existed there before. Being tough is one thing, and I think that's what you're seeing in terms of voter response to that. Certainly from the farm vote, we know that they are the bad actor out there. But it's tough to measure that up against with the effect of what that has done. And so I think inevitably you will see, if it is the Biden administration, them remaining with this tactic of getting tough, staying tough on China, but building an ally, which, I would certainly argue, our members argued, we needed to have those allies there at the beginning, and also have a plan for, whether it's China or there are other trade wars, if we have a Trump administration that, are on the horizon. And if we don't have a plan ahead of that, this cycle of going about this, getting retaliatory tariffs, and then having farmers suffer that loss, and then we go through the cycle of trade aid payments and so forth, that's not a sustainable and strategic process here. I hope whichever administration we end up having, that we see something that is more strategic, but that we remain tough on these trading partners, which are clearly bad actors.
But can Biden stay tough on China without tariffs?
I think, quite frankly, when you look at, that's a great question, and quite frankly, I don't know the answer to it, but I think that one thing that a Biden administration can do with China, besides bringing in allies and using that pressure with China, is also really, we talk about phase one deals. We talk about, a lot of the things that Randy was just talking about, that we know that China's, has been very problematic, manipulation of currency, the intellectual property theft. None of that is getting dealt with right now. That is still way off in the horizon. Can we bring that closer? Can we bring some more teeth into it? But I think the question of lifting the tariffs is a big one. What's the rest of the strategy look like with China?
Something else on the short-term agenda, stimulus sounds like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants to move something now. What, given the change, potential, the loss of seats in the House for Nancy Pelosi, McConnell at this point expecting to retain control of the Senate, what are the prospects for a stimulus bill, and most importantly, a stimulus bill that includes a lot of those ag provisions that Colin Peterson got in the House bill, in a number of sectors, pork, ethanol, all these various sectors that were targeted by the House bill, and also for which there is a lot of support in the Senate.
Phil, I would first of all, I divide it into two different pieces of legislation. I think one is the kind of the omnibus end of year spending bill that funds all the federal departments, including the Department of Agriculture. And, I'm cautiously optimistic that given where this election appears to be headed, and particularly in the House and Senate, that we'll see a deal cut on that. They'll kind of clear the decks and finish something up before Christmas. The spending bill, as you know, expires December 11th. I'm not as optimistic about getting another COVID assistance package between now and Christmas. I still think some of the same dynamics, not only about the overall size of the package, which appears to be in the neighborhood of $2 trillion. That seems to be a price tag that is fairly large compared to where Mitch McConnell has been and some of his colleagues in the Senate. So I'm probably below 50% probability on a COVID package, and cautiously optimistic we can get a funding bill through.
I guess I would split that just a little bit. I would argue that, on the spending bill, I also am cautiously optimistic that they will get something together. On stimulus, I think the big factor there, quite frankly, is going to be if there is a change in the administration, what the effect of the current administration will be on those talks right now.
Let me ask you about one of the issues, though. I get asked about a lot from agriculture, farmers and ranchers, and that's farm labor reform prospects for that. It's just sort of been accepted that you can't really do much about the H-2A program or farm labor until you have a comprehensive immigration reform, something that Joe Biden promised to do an immigration bill right out of the gate. With the divided Congress, what do you all see, if anything, getting out of Congress on that?
God knows it's needed. We've been struggling with this need for over a decade. If, and I stress, if there is a Biden administration in this very kind of evenly divided Congress, it could set up a possibility of a comprehensive immigration package that would include not only seasonal labor, which is important to the produce industry, but also year-round labor, which is important to the dairy sector that Rob's so familiar with and many of his members, as well as the meat and poultry processing and packing business. So I think there's a possibility. I don't believe that'll be something right out of the chute, though. I think that could possibly be, if there is a Biden administration, a second year type of an issue. I don't know if that would be one of the first things that he would use his political capital on, but we'll see.
I guess, some of the initial reports we're seeing that support for Trump grew in areas like South Texas, so forth, where kind of tough talk on border and so forth, continues to be very, very popular. And as everybody here knows, in agriculture, working with the farm workers and so forth, we could have a deal that works for everyone very quickly. I think, that comprehensive immigration reform is always the impediment here, but I think it's encouraging that the Biden administration wants to tackle that. I think there is the question of timing, how soon, but I think ultimately prospects for meaningful and useful ag labor reform is quite possible should the administration change to Biden.
Randy, what would be the secret to getting immigration reform through the Senate, through a Republican Senate? What's going to be the draw?
I think the point Rob made was very important. And that is, if you kind of look at, Phil, the formula that Joe Biden has used in his campaign, he really overperformed in suburban areas, at least from the data you're looking at, in the urban areas, particularly with women. However, where he underperformed, very frankly, was with African Americans and with Hispanics and some other groups, which is a little surprising, frankly. I think in terms of the formula, I agree with Rob. If we could get it a deal on the ag piece of it, the problem is that's a vote getter. And for those that have other issues, like what do you do about the 10.5 million illegals that are already here? What do you do about the DACA issue and all the others? They want the ag vote to help them get votes for a comprehensive package. I don't know if they're going to allow just an ag package to move on its own. That'd be great if we could get that. I don't necessarily see that happening.
So we could obviously talk for probably a number of hours, but as we all joked before we went live here on Facebook, I think the four of us are running on a cumulative 10, maybe 12 hours of sleep, and as Randy joked, that's probably on the high end of the estimate. So obviously a lot of things yet to be determined as some of these results become official, as some of the political lay of the land evens out. But for the time being, Randy and Rob, certainly appreciate you taking a little bit of time to join us to discuss again what we know now and what that all means.
Thanks, Spencer. Thank you, Phil. Good seeing you, Rob.
And want to also mention that a recording of this is going to be made available on Agri-Pulse.com as well as on the Agri-Pulse Facebook page, and would ask that you stay tuned to the rest of stay tuned to Agri-Pulse.com as we continue to watch some of these results, what they mean for ag and food policy, and what they're going to mean for you and your operation. But I think at this point, we're gonna call it a day on this recording. Appreciate all of you joining us online. But for Rob Larew, Randy Russell, and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.